Most conventional modern professionals view the global luxury fashion industry as a superficial ecosystem filled with meaningless, glamorous runway shows, shallow lifestyle influencers, and overpriced silk garments. But they are completely blind to the terrifying computational reality hidden beneath the surface of the lifestyle monopoly. A premier international-style conglomerate is not sustained by artistic inspiration or creative genius. It is anchored entirely by a massive, high-velocity data harvesting mechanism that monitors the precise behavioral desires of 500 million high-net-worth consumers at exactly 6 a.m. On a freezing December morning, I stood in the marble lobby of the Elias Tower in Manhattan, watching hundreds of terrified assistants adjust their expensive designer clothing, sweating under the immense psychological pressure of an executive regime that treats human capital like disposable manufacturing material. The elite corporate structure does not care about your academic credentials or your emotional well-being. It demands absolute, unblinking surrender to the aesthetic vision of a single industry dictator. My name is Andrea, and I did not enter this multi-billion-dollar media machine because I possessed a deep historical passion for seasonal color palettes or high-end footwear distribution channels. I possessed a cold, analytical journalism background that allowed me to view the chaotic fashion industry as an optimization problem waiting to be solved by an architect. My superior officer was Vivien Vance, the legendary, universally feared editor-in-chief of Runway magazine, a woman whose corporate reputation was built on absolute psychological domination, calculated cruelty, and a historical capacity to destroy fashion designers with a single passive glance during a private preview. Vivien did not operate on human schedules. She operated on an administrative clock that required her subordinates to anticipate her private logistical needs 30 minutes before she even conceptualized them. To survive inside her inner orbit, you had to abandon your personal identity and transform yourself into an untiring corporate processing node. In the initial phases of your institutional survival sequence, you must locate a strategic ally who understands the hidden operational mechanics of the machine. Nigel was the executive creative director of the magazine, a cynical, brilliant veteran who had spent 30 years watching young, idealistic professionals get systematically broken by Vivien's administrative demands. Nigel looked at my unpolished wardrobe, my sensible footwear, and my analytical detachment, and he told me that I was completely delusional if I believed my intellectual superiority would protect me from the executioner's block. He explained that the cerulean blue sweater I was wearing was not a choice made by an independent consumer. It was a filtered product calculated years ago by Vivien's board of directors, a multi-million-dollar inventory allocation sequence disguised as an artistic trend. Nigel taught me that to master the empire, I had to stop looking at fashion as art and start analyzing it as a highly weaponized system of global influence. The trajectory of an administrative insurgency always accelerates the exact moment you realize your supervisor's legendary status is entirely dependent on your operational efficiency. Vivien arrived at the office at 7 a.m., throwing her expensive fur coat onto my desk without making eye contact, demanding a complete logistical arrangement for her private flight to Paris, a physical copy of an unpublished fantasy manuscript for her twin daughters, and an immediate reservation at an exclusive restaurant that didn't accept corporate bookings. I stood in the center of the executive suite, listening to her quiet, low-frequency voice deliver these impossible, contradictory commands, and I realized that her cruelty was not random. It was a deliberate filtering mechanism designed to eliminate weak assets from her network. I didn't cry. I didn't submit a human resources complaint. I accessed my private networks, bypassed the traditional reservation systems, and secured the assets before she could even finish her morning double espresso. When you achieve a level of operational flawlessness that makes you completely indispensable to a corporate dictator, your relationship shifts from standard servitude to a highly dangerous strategic alliance. I didn't just manage Vivien's personal calendar. I began to re-engineer the digital backend of the entire media publication. The traditional print division was bleeding cash due to declining newsstand circulation. While Vivien continued to demand millions of dollars for extravagant photo shoots in remote geographic locations, I quietly built a predictive user tracking engine that matched individual subscription data with direct luxury e-commerce inventory. transforming the magazine from a legacy cultural review into an automated, high-margin transaction engine. Nigel watched the initial revenue spikes on our internal dashboards and warned me that I was playing a highly volatile game. Because the moment Vivien realized my software was outperforming her personal taste, the boardroom would turn into a slaughterhouse. They always assume that because you are a quiet, dedicated assistant, you are completely blind to the high-level boardroom betrayals happening above your pay grade. During our annual relocation to the Paris Fashion Week, I accidentally accessed an encrypted communication log on Vivien's private tablet device, discovering that the chairman of our parent media conglomerate, a French billionaire named Christian Ravitz, was planning a massive corporate coup to replace Vivien with a younger, less expensive French editor. The board viewed Vivien as an expensive, aging relic who was resisting the complete digitization of the asset pool. They wanted to use her final Parisian presentation as a public retirement ceremony, introducing her successor while Vivien was trapped in the front row. I sat in my hotel room, looking at the structural breakdown of the corporate shares, and realized that the legacy queen was about to be executed by her own financial creators. True corporate survival requires you to make a cold mathematical calculation to defend the dictator who oppresses you, simply because her continued sovereignty protects your current operational placement. I did not inform Vivien out of personal loyalty or emotional affection. I informed her because her planned successor was an institutional puppet who would immediately dismantle my digital tracking engine to restore traditional advertising agencies. I intercepted Vivien inside her private limousine, presenting the automated board logs that detailed the chairman's planned replacement timeline. She didn't gasp. Her expression didn't change. She merely stared out the rain-slicked window of the vehicle, her hands adjusting her luxury leather gloves with an intense, freezing precision. She thanked me in her signature low whisper. And in that exact moment, I knew the assistant and the devil had officially aligned their weapons against the board of directors. The absolute ruthlessness of a legendary executive is best observed during a public celebration where she systematically sacrifices her closest ally to secure her own professional survival. The next evening, during a lavish gala at the Louvre, the chairman stepped to the microphone to announce the new corporate structure, fully expecting to blindside Vivien. But Vivien had already moved her pieces in the dark. She had met with the chairman's primary retail investors an hour prior, presenting my digital e-commerce conversion data and threatening to walk away from the publication with her top 50 luxury designers if her position was compromised. To pacify the investors, Vivien offered them an alternative sacrifice. She announced that Nigel was leaving Runway to run a secondary international brand, using his long-awaited promotion as a financial shield to protect her own chair. Nigel sat at the table, his face turning entirely pale, realizing his lifelong dream had been turned into a bargaining chip for Vivien's survival. The most terrifying realization of your professional ascent occurs when you look across a desk at a corporate monster and realize that your own reflection has begun to match her features perfectly. After the gala, Vivien sat in her dressing room, surrounded by hundreds of discarded designer gowns, looking at me with a chilling maternal approval. "You did well in tracking that board information, Andrea," she said softly. "You see, everyone wants to be us. Everyone wants this life, because we make the decisions that dictate how the world thinks." I looked at my smartphone, seeing dozens of missed calls from my old friends, my family, and my partner, individuals whose emotional lives I had completely ignored to maintain my operational velocity inside her empire. I had sacrificed Nigel. I had abandoned my personal ethical code, and I had protected a tyrant, all for a fraction of corporate authority inside a skyscraper. True institutional independence is not achieved by walking away from the machine in a fit of emotional morality. It is proven by building your own engine that renders the original machine completely obsolete. The morning after our return to New York, I walked into the Elias Tower, but I didn't go to Vivien's office to drop off her dry cleaning. I walked directly into the chairman's executive boardroom. I laid down a formal intellectual property withdrawal notice on the marble table. My private software engine, which was currently generating 62% of Runway's digital conversion revenue, was registered under an independent holding shield that I personally controlled. If Vivien or the board attempted to terminate my placement or restrict my equity transition, I would instantly revoke the data routing licenses, crashing their online infrastructure within 24 hours. The assistant was no longer a subordinate asset. She was the primary creditor of the entire media empire. The fatal mistake made by legacy media executives is assuming that their personal brand equity can outlast a structural asset freeze executed by a superior technical mind. The chairman attempted to threaten me with an immediate copyright infringement lawsuit, claiming that the code had been developed during my employment hours under a standard work-for-hire clause. I smiled, slid my laptop across the conference table, and showed him the original employment contract Vivien had drafted for me, a document so rushed and filled with administrative omissions that it failed to include standard technical assignment clauses. I didn't build this algorithm inside your corporate ecosystem, gentlemen. I built it in my private apartment using an open-source framework. You can either purchase the license from my independent entity for $40 million in preferred shares, or you can watch your digital valuation drop to zero by Friday afternoon. The ultimate validation of your corporate ruthlessness is not a polite thank you note from a human resources department. It is the silent, terrified respect of the person who tried to break you. As I walked out of the executive boardroom with my signed share agreements, I passed Vivien in the main corridor. She was surrounded by her new army of terrified junior assistants, holding her morning coffee and walking at her standard high-speed velocity. She stopped for a single fraction of a second, looked at the share manifest in my hand, and delivered a barely perceptible nod of absolute professional recognition. She didn't say a word. She didn't offer a dramatic apology for her past treatment. She simply recognized that her pupil had successfully mastered her system of total, uncompromised domination. I stepped into the elevator, watching the doors close on her empire, fully aware that the wolf had officially left the cage. When you transition from a corporate assistant to a major shareholder, the old administrative staff who used to treat you like a temporary inconvenience suddenly transform into desperate sycophants seeking your operational favor. I hired Nigel away from Vivien's toxic orbit within 72 hours of my corporate departure, placing him at the head of my new independent digital design house, with a $5 million signing bonus and a 10% equity stake in our automated tracking network. We didn't require Vivien's editorial approval to launch new collections because our predictive software bypassed the traditional magazine format entirely, delivering direct consumer metrics to the major manufacturing hubs in Milan and Tokyo. The old guard fashion elite spent a century believing that their taste dictated the market. But we proved that user data is the ultimate editor-in-chief of modern civilization. The modern luxury sector is not an artistic community managing creative heritage. It is a brutal, data-driven battlefield where legacy print publications are systematically starved of cash by automated digital platforms. Within 6 months of our launch, our independent digital network had captured 45% of Runway's core advertising accounts. The major cosmetics firms and luxury automobile brands realized that paying Vivien $500,000 for a single print page was a financial anomaly when our platform could guarantee 10 million direct purchase clicks within 4 milliseconds of an algorithmic deployment. Vivien's board of directors began to hold emergency meetings in Paris, watching their quarterly profit margins decay by 22%, while our private holding company accelerated toward a $3 billion valuation without owning a single printing press. True systemic leverage is achieved when you design an execution strategy that forces your former oppressor to either buy your infrastructure at an inflated premium or watch her own legacy dissolve on the public markets. Vivien tried to execute a counterstrike by launching a rival digital application funded by an old-money Swiss luxury trust, but her developers built a slow, bloated system that relied on manual editorial uploads rather than automated user tracking. On the morning of her highly publicized digital launch, I executed a targeted algorithmic update on our network, offering an exclusive zero-margin distribution deal to her top 10 fashion designers, completely draining her platform of content before her servers could even process their initial user logins. Her application crashed within 3 hours of activation, costing her investors $95 million in wasted development capital. The final act of an industrial liquidation is never delivered with a dramatic shouting match. It is completed with a silent, polite signature inside an expensive law firm over mineral water. The chairman called my private line at 2 a.m., his voice stripped of its old Parisian arrogance, requesting an immediate emergency acquisition meeting at our corporate counsel's office. They offered to purchase our digital tracking network for $500 million in cash, under the explicit condition that I assume the role of global chief executive officer of the entire Consolidated media group, including Runway magazine. I sat at the head of the table, looking at the acquisition manifest, and realized that the corporate matrix had come full circle. I was being invited back into the tower, not to fetch the dry cleaning, but to hold the lease. The first administrative action you take upon assuming control of a consolidated global media empire is the systematic elimination of the toxic operational protocols that once threatened your own professional sanity. I walked onto the editorial floor of Runway magazine at 9 a.m. as the newly appointed chief executive officer, dressed in a simple tailored suit, completely free from the insecure luxury posturing that defined the previous regime. The entire staff was standing in absolute, petrified silence, expecting an immediate wave of retaliatory terminations. I called a general meeting in the main studio, looking at the young, exhausted assistants who were sweating under their expensive designer clothing, and announced a complete restructuring of the operational framework. We are eliminating the manual administrative assistant structure entirely, replacing it with an automated logistics engine. Your value to this company will no longer be measured by how fast you can run down a hallway with a latte. It will be measured by your analytical capacity to optimize the network. The true resolution of your past trauma is achieved the exact moment you sit across a mahogany desk from your old tormentor and discover that she no longer possesses the psychological power to alter your heart rate. Vivien Vance sat in her signature glass office, holding a copy of the new corporate organizational chart that placed her editorial budget under my direct executive approval. She didn't scream. She didn't drop her trademark icy composure. She simply looked at me through her expensive designer glasses with a cold, ancient curiosity. "You think you have rewritten the system, Andrea," she said in her low whisper, "but you have merely accepted the crown. The throne demands the same coldness, regardless of who sits on it." I looked at her, smiled calmly, and slid her approved budget across the table without a single drop of emotional hesitation. "The difference is, Vivien, you let the throne dictate your taste, while I use the algorithm to control the asset. We are systematically lied to by business school professors who tell us that a corporate brand is built on emotional consumer loyalty and historic narrative value. A brand is nothing more than a temporary monopoly over a specific distribution channel. The second that channel is bypassed by a more efficient infrastructure, the brand equity evaporates into thin air, leaving the legacy shareholders holding nothing but a collection of expensive historical files. We didn't purchase Runway magazine because we valued its cultural commentary or its artistic heritage. We purchased it because its name gave our automated tracking algorithm immediate, non-negotiable entry into the private data pools of the global wealthy elite. We turned the concept of luxury fashion into a highly lucrative behavioral laboratory, proving that the person who runs the platform always dictates the reality of the market. The absolute finality of a technological revolution is marked by the complete demolition of the physical spaces where the old establishment used to exercise their temporary authority. 2 years after my executive transition, I signed the final real estate liquidation documents to sell the Elias Tower to a commercial data storage provider, relocating our entire global headquarters to a decentralized, solar-powered campus in California, the old marble lobbies, the executive dining rooms where the fashion tycoons used to drink expensive champagne, and the historic editing suites were completely gutted to make room for rows of liquid-cooled server racks. The old guard professionals who had spent their lives playing traditional boardroom politics were left wandering through the employment markets, completely unable to comprehend that their entire industry had been compressed into a single self-optimizing software loop running in the cloud. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., long before the traditional media analysts have compiled their market summaries, our central server architecture processes the behavioral tracking logs of our global subscription network. We do not guess which garments or fabrics will become popular in the upcoming season based on the emotional intuition of an editor. Our algorithm monitors the search latencies, geometric preference loops, and biometric interactions of millions of users across 60 capital cities. We transmit this raw data directly to the automated manufacturing facilities in Shanghai and Milan, producing the exact volume of luxury inventory required to satisfy the market 3 months before the consumer even conceptualizes the desire. We have successfully replaced the entire speculative design cycle with a clinical, high-margin logistics loop that maintains a zero-waste efficiency grid. The ultimate validation of an industrial modernization strategy is recorded on the gross profit ledger of your Consolidated holding corporation, where our operating costs have dropped to an unprecedented fraction of our historical overhead. The legacy media elite used to spend $40 million annually on physical magazine distribution, international shipping logistics, and lavish promotional events designed to impress their own social circles. Our automated network has compressed those legacy expenses into a single cloud infrastructure budget that amounts to less than 2% of our gross revenue streams. We proved that the concept of prestige is completely meaningless on Wall Street if it cannot be translated into an automated, high-velocity cash multiplier. You can either be the traditional tastemaker who begs for advertising dollars, or you can be the data architect who collects the platform tax. True administrative dominance is reached when your organization has achieved such a level of market saturation that the most prestigious fashion houses on earth cannot execute a single product launch without your explicit system authorization. The CEO of an elite Parisian couture label attempted to bypass our digital network, choosing to launch their signature winter collection exclusively through a legacy print campaign and independent physical boutiques. Our tracking system automatically detected the marketing anomaly, adjusted our search optimization protocols, and downranked their digital brand presence across all major search engines within 40 seconds of their campaign launch. Their online sales crashed by 78% within 5 days, forcing their executive board to send an urgent delegation to our California campus to request an emergency API integration token. The core engine of modern digital monopoly relies entirely on the continuous, non-consensual monetization of human attention span through optimized interface design. While our legacy competitors were busy trying to convince consumers to buy physical magazines or watch traditional television advertisements, our platform was harvesting the micro-movements, scrolling velocities, and gaze durations of half the planet through our integrated media applications. We turned the concept of personal style into a highly structured behavioral loop that feeds our automated advertising matrix. We didn't just build a digital media publication, we successfully constructed the primary lifestyle tax grid of the 21st century, forcing every luxury merchant on the planet to pay a continuous dividend to our holding company to access their own customer base. The resolution of an industrial insurgency is marked by the complete evaporation of emotional noise from the environments where you execute your long-term strategy. I sat on the private balcony of our new administrative suite overlooking the Place Vendôme in Paris, holding an analytical report that classified our media group as the most profitable digital conglomerate in European history. The lawyers had all been paid. The old boardroom lawsuits had all been settled into non-voting common stock blocks, and the legacy fashion editors had finally dropped their adversarial posture. They don't call me an unpolished assistant anymore. They write my name in gold letters on their investment manifests, but I haven't changed my focus, and I haven't changed my rules. I am still the same analytical mind who stood in that freezing tower lobby, and I am still writing the script that runs the machine. The most deceptive narrative pitched to young creatives by the fashion elite is the idea that success requires total submission to an established institutional hierarchy. It is a magnificent psychological trap designed to strip you of your creative sovereignty before your intellectual assets can achieve natural market scale. The moment you accept their entry-level placement under a toxic manager, you are trading your long-term equity for a temporary title that carries zero operational authority. We built our new digital collective by explicitly rejecting their institutional validation until we possess the mathematical scale to dictate our own terms to their board of directors. If you want to control the industry, you must stop performing for the managers and start building the repository. The absolute test of your personal transformation occurs when you look back at the old data logs from the night you launched your first system overhaul and realize you no longer feel a single drop of resentment toward the people who tried to break your spirit. I received an automated digital notification from our corporate escrow bank confirming that the final multi-million-dollar retirement package for Vivien Vance had been officially processed into her private family trust. I looked at the confirmation screen for half a second, clicked the archive button, and immediately returned to reviewing our infrastructure latency reports. The corporate war that had consumed my entire 20s had been reduced to a simple background process that cleared itself on a rainy afternoon. I didn't feel an impulse to celebrate. I felt only the clean, elegant silence of a resolved error. We are systematically lied to by cultural critics who tell us that human taste is a mysterious, divine quality that cannot be replicated by artificial networks. Human taste is nothing more than a highly predictable set of neurochemical responses driven by a desire for social status and geographic validation. Our engineering division successfully decomposed the entire historical archive of Runway magazine into 300 distinct algorithmic variables, including geometric line ratios, textile color contrasts, and compositional density metrics. Our generative software can now produce an identical luxury editorial layout within 6 milliseconds that outscores Vivien's top creative directors in blind consumer focus groups. We didn't just automate the administration of the empire, we successfully automated the soul of the couture. True systemic leverage is achieved when you design an executive voting framework that makes it mathematically impossible for an activist investor or an old guard board of directors to remove you from the architecture you built. During our pre-merger restructuring sequence, our legal team established a dual-class share architecture that granted my private holding company exactly 10 votes per share, while leaving the public investment firms with a single vote per unit. This legal configuration guarantees that even if the French luxury funds purchase 80% of our outstanding equity on the open market, I retain absolute 51% voting control over every corporate resolution, board appointment, and platform deployment. They can buy the dividend stream, they can host the shareholder meetings, but they can never fire the architect. The ultimate outcome of an economic insurgency is reached when your corporate platform has achieved such a level of global saturation that the concept of competition itself is completely eliminated from the marketplace. We officially completed the acquisition of our last major international publishing rival on a Friday afternoon, permanently migrating their user base to our centralized infrastructure and shutting down their server arrays. Our system was now processing 94% of all lifestyle media traffic on the planet. Our platform was no longer an application. It was the digital environment where modern consumer culture existed. We had successfully constructed an unbreakable intellectual property monopoly, using nothing but an uncompromised analytical focus, proving that the person who writes the algorithm always dictates the reality. People within the fashion space frequently study our corporate transition as if it were a magical anomaly in the history of media, writing academic case studies for Harvard Business School about our technical scaling strategy and our administrative transformation. But there was no magic involved. It was a clinical, cold exercise in total infrastructure sovereignty. The old guard institutions spent a century believing that the person who controlled the physical inventory controlled the asset. But they forgot that in a digitized world, the system configuration is the ultimate asset. If you possess the technical capacity to build the data pipeline, you hold an absolute non-negotiable monopoly over the human beings who want to display their status. They can hire the designers, they can draft the contracts, and they can stage the runways. But when the dark hits the market, they will always crawl back to the root administrator. When the regional trade commissions realize they cannot legally halt your market penetration, They will always attempt to deploy an army of administrative auditors to bury your development floor under a continuous mountain of compliance paperwork. We received a formal mandate from the European Regulatory Board demanding a complete line-by-line documentation audit of our global automated pricing adjustment code. I didn't assign our core engineering staff to compile the logs. I wrote a recursive script that automatically generated 400 million pages of raw, unindexed machine code, delivering the data to their Brussels offices via an automated digital transfer that completely crashed their internal network servers. We answered their audit with total compliance, but we delivered the compliance at a technical velocity that exposed their complete structural incompetence. The ultimate form of professional security is reached when your organization has achieved such a level of technological saturation that your competitors cannot even identify the physical location of the personnel who are actively running the platform. We transitioned our primary architecture division from our visible New York headquarters to a completely decentralized, encrypted dark network protocol. Our top 80 designers and engineers operate from anonymous locations across 20 different countries, communicating exclusively through private cryptographic keys and rotating virtual terminals. They do not possess corporate titles, they do not appear on our public organizational charts, and they do not have listings on LinkedIn. They exist entirely as ghosts inside the server architecture, making it absolutely impossible for our rivals to headhunt our talent or map out our product roadmap. The most deceptive narrative pitched to young professionals by the media elite is the idea that an expensive internship at a legacy brand is a form of validation. It is a magnificent psychological trap designed to strip you of your sovereign value before your product can achieve natural market dominance. The moment you accept that initial unpaid placement, you are inviting a board of directors into your creative process, individuals whose only utility is to inflate the short-term valuation of their platform so they can flip their shares to a larger fund during the next round. They don't care about your artistic vision. They don't care about your engineering floor. They are simply financial scalpers who view your life's work as a high-yield leverage vehicle. We built our company by explicitly rejecting their capital until we possess the mathematical scale to dictate our own terms. True corporate maturity is achieved the exact moment you stop seeking the validation of the people who attempted to exploit your early technical vulnerability. I sat across from the senior managing director of a legacy European investment bank during our pre-IPO roadshow in London. He was dressed in a pristine bespoke suit, holding an analytical report that classified our engineering culture as highly unconventional and potentially volatile. Andrea, your platform lacks a traditional creative governance framework. How can we assure our institutional investors that your leadership is stable? I looked at his analytical report, smiled, and slid it back across the table. Your institutional investors aren't purchasing my stability, Director. They are purchasing access to a database that currently controls the attention span of 400 million active consumers. If they don't like the governance, they can buy government bonds. The core engine of modern financial domination relies entirely on the continuous, automated extraction of behavioral data from a defenseless consumer population. While our competitors were busy trying to sell physical products or manage traditional inventory distribution channels, our platform was harvesting the digital fingerprints, preference loops, and communication networks of half the planet. We didn't require a manufacturing plant or a raw material supply chain. Our users were voluntarily creating our content, maintaining our infrastructure, and inviting their friends into our database entirely for free. We turned the concept of human attention into a highly lucrative commodity that could be packaged, segmented, and auctioned off to global corporations within 4 milliseconds of user interaction. We didn't just build an application. We successfully constructed the primary digital tax grid of the 21st century. The final act of legal liquidation is completed when the court reporter clicks off the digital recording array and the room falls into an absolute, exhausting silence. I stood up from the long marble table on the 45th floor, zipped up my generic gray jacket, and walked toward the glass doors without looking back at the old board members or their attorneys. They were sitting in their expensive chairs, surrounded by boxes of paper documents, review logs, and corporate briefs that had failed to protect their authority. They had spent 2 years attempting to prove that I was an insubordinate asset, but they walked out of the room holding nothing but a financial settlement that turned them into dependent shareholders of my intellect. They owned the past, but I owned the master repository. The ultimate validation of your structural rebellion occurs when the very academic institutions that used to classify your antisocial behavior as an operational liability invite you to sit on their advisory boards. I stepped onto the main stage of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, looking out at an auditorium packed with 1,200 elite students dressed in pristine corporate blazers. They sat with their notebooks open, waiting to write down my principles of algorithmic corporate dilution and platform scaling. I didn't use a polished slide deck or repeat the standard venture capital platitudes. I looked directly at the front row and delivered the only truth that matters. Stop attempting to network your way into the boardroom. Go home, open your terminal, and write an algorithm that leaves their entire legacy asset structure completely obsolete. The true luxury of achieving monumental technological success is the deliberate creation of a private space where nobody can ever demand your attention for their administrative profit again. I constructed a private engineering laboratory on a remote island in the Pacific Northwest, a space with no network connections to the outside world, no phone lines, and no access for corporate executives without my explicit handwritten clearance. I spend 3 weeks a year in that room, sitting in a simple wooden chair, writing code for our upcoming decentralized storage protocol, completely free from the suffocating anxiety of the board meetings, the investor calls, and the legal depositions. I set myself on fire for 10 years to build a global network, and now I utilize that network to buy my absolute silence. If you are sitting inside a corporate cubicle right now, listening to this script through your headphones while an arrogant manager adjusts his luxury watch and demands your compliance on an uncompensated project, open your eyes to the mathematical reality. You are not a subordinate asset inside an institutional matrix. You are an entire trading engine that has simply chosen to sell its velocity for a flat salary because you haven't yet calculated the true power of your independence. Document your routing scripts, analyze the latency of your company's infrastructure, and when the exact moment of market desynchronization occurs, have the absolute courage to take your box and walk out of the skyscraper, leave them with their country clubs, leave them with their credentials, and let their blue chip stock crash to absolute zero. Because the wolf doesn't belong in a corporate cage. He belongs on the floor, running the entire soundtrack.